Hello all dear friends. In this video we will talk about the counteroffensive has begun. The APU is knocking the Russians out of the Kherson region. The first phase was powerful strikes on the enemy's rear bases. The Russian occupants are fleeing the territory of Kherson region under various pretexts, trying to take away documents and looted property. As Natalia Gumenyuk, spokesperson for the Operational Command South, reported in a telethon, against the backdrop of constant bashing in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions and the vulnerability of their own logistics, Russians are panicked about a repeat of last year's Kharkov scenario. How the Russians found themselves in such a precarious position, as well as why the counterattack by the APU can be considered to have already begun, military expert Dmitry, as Natalia Gumenyuk insists, on the southern direction the Russian occupiers are short runs trying to find a safer place for themselves. They unsuccessfully try to keep their actions secret, but the APU command promptly receives information about the actions and plans of the enemy. This is not the first time that the occupants in the seized part of the Kherson region have taken actions that look very much like preparations for another goodwill gesture. Moreover, they do it even without the wording from above, namely on their own initiative, realizing that when the Russian Ministry of Defense gives the appropriate order, it may be very late. This is the position we observed last year in the Kharkov region, when the Russian defense collapsed and the troops panicked and fled. Even then, the Russians learned some lessons from their failure, and their goodwill gesture from the right bank of the Dnieper River in the Kherson region did not have such disastrous consequences. For several weeks now, we have been recording the constant hustle and bustle of the Russian military and collaborators in Novaya Kakhovka, as well as in Skatovsk, where, according to our general staff, the Russians are winding down their administration, removing looted property and documents by sea. By sea, because other escape routes are dangerous for them due to the strike capabilities of the APU and the activity of the resistance movement. Now the Russians' fuss has intensified against a backdrop of the provision of new Western weapons to Ukraine. First of all, it concerns the British Storm Shadow missiles, which can reach up to 300 kilometers away. The APU is now keeping all Russian operational rear lines under fire control, which is of key importance for our counterattack. It is noteworthy that the Ukrainian bavina is particularly in full bloom in the captured parts of the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, but not only. Explosions are rumbling near Mariupol, which the Russians consider a sort of rear territory. There are reports of effective strikes against Russian positions in Berdyansk. The fact that the Russians are trying to flee, primarily from Kherson Oblast, under various pretexts in solitary mode, indicates that they understand the precariousness, if not the wretchedness, of their situation. If the Ukrainian armed forces are powerfully harassing near Mariupol, then there is little to say about the still occupied areas of the Kherson region. The likelihood of another goodwill gesture in the Kherson region is precisely due to their general vulnerability in terms of logistics. The strikes against the occupiers' bases, supply depots and command posts, which we are now seeing in the occupied territories, are the first stage of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which has already begun. And this point should be mentioned separately because there are certain discrepancies in the statements by representatives of the authorities. The Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Alexei Danilov, said in a recent interview with the BBC that the counterattack by the APU is already ready to start and could begin tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, or in a week. Mikhail Podolyak, advisor to the head of Ukraine's presidential office, said in an interview with the Italian TV channel RAI last week that our defense forces have already launched a counteroffensive. The counteroffensive has been going on for several days now, Mikhail Podolyak was quoted by Italian journalists as saying. According to him, on the front line, which stretches for almost 1,500 kilometers, individual operations have already begun. Mikhail Podolyak's position is more realistic, given the situation in the occupied territories of the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. The APU, unlike the Russians, uses a proven NATO tactic, the frog-jumping tactic, which proved itself perfectly in the Kharkov region and on the right bank of the Dnieper River. First, with powerful missile strikes we destroy the occupiers' logistics, disarm and exsanguinate their contingent on the line of contact, and only then step by step dislodge the Russians from a particular territory, a settlement or a district. Such tactics allow us to act more effectively and, most importantly, to conserve personnel. On the contrary, the Russians' tactics are absolutely Zhukovian, which is clearly seen in the Russian operation to take Bakhmut, when Prigozhin's musicians, cons and Russian military personnel piled our positions with their corpses. The APU fights differently. Therefore, the question, has the APU counteroffensive begun? Can be answered in the affirmative. Yes, it has begun and we are witnessing its first stage on the territory of the south of the country.